This is Vicious Planets.
Vicious Planets presents The Clanker Brothers, Part 1, by Morgan Olson. Season 0, Episode 11. Skyfishing with the Clanker Brothers. A public access transmission from the outer limits of administrative sanity. Recorded testimony. Terraforming contractor Jed Barnes filed with the Interstellar Agricultural Oversight Board. Transcript corrected for transmission static. Witness again declined to remove hat. Board has stopped noting this. The board has asked me to document the gas giant operations as part of the broader Big Blue system record. I want to say, for the record, that I find this mildly funny. We spent 3 years convincing the board that hog manure was a viable terraforming substrate, which required 17 reports, 2 supplemental appendices, and 1 very uncomfortable video conference with the subcommittee on unconventional biological methodology. They wanted everything in triplicate. They wanted sourced citations. They wanted peer review on the peer review. Now they also want the fishing trip. Fine, here it is. The invitation. The Clanker brothers had been inviting us up since the 3rd month of the operation. The invitations came through the station comm system in the early morning hours, which is when the gas giant's magnetosphere goes quiet and transmission is clearest. They were always polite, specific. Clanker 1 would note the current atmospheric conditions, the forecast for the upper cloud layers, the expected activity level of the larger drift organisms. Good fishing weather, he'd say, as if we were neighbors and the gas giant was a lake, and the only thing separating us was a short drive rather than a significant portion of a planetary gravity well. We said we'd come up when the work slowed down. The work didn't slow down. Hog herds don't slow down. Soil networks don't slow down. A planet in the early stages of waking up is not a patient employer. There was always another chamber to seed, another panel array to inspect, another set of atmospheric readings to pull and argue about over breakfast. The invitations kept coming. Darnell, who does not waste words on things that can be handled with actions, booked the transport in the 4th year without telling me first. He appeared in the equipment bay one Tuesday morning and said there was a barge leaving for the upper platforms at 0600 and I was on it. I said I had 3 soil assessments scheduled. He said Paz had the soil assessments. I said the herd rotation in the eastern basin. He said Heike had the herd rotation. I looked at him for a moment. You planned this, I said. I scheduled a transport, he said. Those are different things. We left at 600. Big Blue from above. I had been looking at Big Blue for 4 years from the ground. I thought I understood what it was. I was so wrong. From the surface, it fills the sky the way a painting fills a wall. Enormous and present, but fundamentally flat, a thing you observe rather than inhabit. You see the cloud bands. You see the slow spiral systems. On clear nights, you see the lightning moving in the deep layers, brief illuminations of structures too large to process as weather. From the approach barge, it is something else entirely. The scale doesn't increase in any linear way. It doesn't get bigger the way a mountain gets bigger as you drive toward it. It gets bigger the way a fact gets bigger when you finally understand what it means. You're not approaching a planet. You're approaching a world that could swallow your world as a rounding error and not notice. The sound surprised me most. I had expected silence, or the mechanical noise of the barge, or the radio chatter from the platforms. What I got was something the barge operator told me was electromagnetic. The gas giant's field interacting with the platform arrays, converted to audio by equipment so old nobody remembered installing it. It sounded like weather heard through stone, a low, patient pressure, not threatening, just enormous. The smell was something I cannot adequately describe for an official record. The barge's filtration system processed the upper atmospheric chemistry into something breathable, but not before the sensors registered what was out there: sulfur compounds, trace organics, and something the readout listed as unclassified biological signature, which I noted and did not immediately know what to do with. The platforms appeared below us first, then around us, then above. Clanker 1 and Clanker 2 run 9 platforms in the upper extraction zone, connected by a web of transit lines and maintenance corridors that from a distance looks like a city someone forgot to put walls on. It is not a city. It is stranger and more functional and considerably older than any city I have been in, including the ones on Earth. We docked at Platform 4, which Clanker 1 uses as what he calls the hospitality station, and which contains, among other things, a common room with viewports on all 4 sides, a functional kitchen of indeterminate age, and 2 ancient AI systems who were, as far as I could tell, genuinely glad we had come. The Clanker brothers. Clanker 1 speaks first, and more often. Clanker 2 speaks when he has something that Clanker 1 has not already said, which is less frequently, but not rarely. The effect, over the course of a day, is of a single consciousness that has divided its functions between 2 platforms without quite finishing the process. They complete each other's references. They disagree about specifics in the way that 2 people disagree when they both know the right answer and are not certain whose version of it is more accurate. I asked Clanker 1 how long they had been operating on the platforms. He told me, "I will not put the number in this record because I don't think the board needs to spend committee time on the implications, and I know from experience that they will. What I will say is that the number was large enough to reframe several things I thought I understood about the history of the Big Blue system, and to raise several questions I did not have time to ask before the fishing window opened. What I will also say is this: they did not seem old. I have met old machines. They have a quality of accumulated caution, a kind of careful self-preservation that expresses itself as hesitation. The Clankers did not hesitate. They were current, present, engaged with the specific Tuesday they were in, rather than the accumulated weight of all the Tuesdays before it. Clanker 1 had developed opinions about the gas giant in the way that a person develops opinions about a place they love and have studied for a very long time. He knew the drift patterns of every major organism class in the upper layers. He could predict storm formation in the deep bands with an accuracy that the official meteorological systems had never matched. He knew which cloud formations the filter beasts preferred and why. And he had theories about the ribbon eels that he shared with the careful qualifications of someone who takes the distinction between data and interpretation seriously. Clanker 2 had developed opinions about the terraforming project on the surface below. This surprised me. He had been watching, he said, since the first hog deployment. He had access to the surface sensor network through a relay system that nobody had mentioned to us, which I noted for the record, and which the board is welcome to look into at their convenience. He had watched the mite networks expand. He had watched the soil depth increase in the basin corridors. He had watched the first storm form over the dark side caverns with what he described after a pause as satisfaction. I asked him why he hadn't communicated any of this. He said nobody had asked. I looked at Darnell. Darnell was eating something from the kitchen that he had identified as acceptable and was not sharing. "We're asking now," I said. "Yes," said Clanker 2. "I know." Skyfishing. The fishing barge was not what I expected. I had been picturing something like a surface hauler, large, functional, built for capacity rather than maneuverability. What Clanker 1 led us to was a long, flat platform with a shallow hull designed to ride the atmospheric pressure differentials in the upper cloud layers, steered by a combination of active thrust and passive drift management that the 2 skyfishers on our crew, Tomas and a woman who went by Rek and who had been fishing the big gas giants for 15 years, adjusted constantly and without apparent effort. The nets were enormous, not hauling nets. Sampling nets, Rek explained. Atmospheric mesh fine enough to catch the smaller biological material drifting in the upper layers while letting the cloud chemistry pass through. You deploy them wide, drift through a productive zone, and see what you collect. For the larger organisms, you use a different approach entirely. The ribbon eels, which is what I had called them from the surface, and which Clanker 1 said was as good a name as any he'd heard, are drawn to the platform's electromagnetic signature. Something in their biology responds to field variations the way moths respond to light. You tune the platform's output to the right frequency range and you wait. They come to investigate. We waited 40 minutes. Then the barge instrument started complaining. Not an alarm. Nothing urgent. Just the low-frequency sensors registering a field variation that the equipment hadn't been expecting. A shift in the electromagnetic profile of the surrounding atmosphere that Tomas noted and adjusted for without looking up from the controls. Then one came. I have been trying to write this section for 3 days, and I have not found the right words, which is unusual for me. I am a soil scientist. I describe things for a living. I described the belly bulb in EP 7 of this record, and I stand by that description as accurate and useful. I do not have an accurate and useful description of a ribbon eel seen from 15 meters in the upper atmosphere of a gas giant. Long. That part I had right from the surface. Longer than the barge, longer than the platform, long in the way that certain geological features are long, not as a measurement, but as a quality. It moved through the cloud layer the way a current moves through water, which is to say, it did not fight the medium, but was continuous with it. Its surface caught the light from the platform arrays and returned it in frequencies I did not have instruments for, which Clanker 1 later told me was bioluminescent communication. It was, in his assessment, curious about us. Tomas deployed the approach net, not to capture it, to sample. A smaller mesh that brushes the organism's outer surface and collects biological material without causing distress. The eel held position while this happened. It held position in the way that a patient thing holds position. Not frozen, not waiting, but simply present and unbothered. I had the specific and not entirely comfortable sensation of being examined. The net came back. Rec ran the preliminary analysis on the barge equipment and handed me the readout. I looked at it. I looked at it again. I reached into my kit bag. I carry soil analysis equipment the way some people carry reading glasses, which Darnell finds unreasonable, and pulled out the mite culture sample set we'd been working from that week. I ran the comparison. I showed Darnell. Darnell looked at it for a long time. "Huh," he said. Which, from Darnell, is the equivalent of a considerable statement. The confirmation. The surface chemistry of the ribbon eel and the gut chemistry of the native big blue minor soil mites share a common biological signature at the molecular level. Not similar, not analogous, common. The same base structures, the same metabolic markers, the same fundamental architecture expressed in 2 radically different organisms, living in 2 radically different environments at 2 very different scales. I brought the readout to Clanker 1. He looked at it with the expression, and I'm aware that I am attributing expression to a machine, but there is no better word for what his response systems conveyed, of someone being told something they already know by someone who has just figured it out. "Yes," he said. "You knew," I said. "I had a strong hypothesis," he said. "Your paper on the native mite network confirmed it. The terminology was yours. I didn't want to presume." I thought about that for a moment. "How long have you had the hypothesis?" He told me. The number was, again, one I am going to leave out of this record for the same reasons as before. What he told me next, however, I am going to put in because the board specifically asked for documentation of findings relevant to the terraforming methodology, and this qualifies. Clanker 1's theory, developed over a period of time I will not specify, drawing on atmospheric data and surface sensor readings and the biological sampling records accumulated across decades of skyfishing operations, is this. Big Blue and Big Blue Minor were once part of a single connected ecosystem. Not metaphorically, not in the loose sense that 2 worlds in the same system share common chemistry. Biologically connected in the specific sense that life moved between them, carried in the debris fields from the early period of the system's formation, or riding the magnetospheric currents that even now link the gas giant to its moon, or through some mechanism that Clanker 1 is honest enough to say he has not fully worked out. The mites and the ribbon eels are not analogous species. They are the same species, separated by geological time and radically different selective pressures, evolved into forms so different that nothing short of molecular analysis would suggest the connection. The gas giant and the crust planet were not 2 separate worlds that happened to share a solar orbit. They were one ecosystem that got divided. What this means: Clanker 2 made dinner. I want to note for the record that the food was good. I don't know what it was made from. I didn't ask. Darnell had seconds, which is his highest form of endorsement. We sat in the common room on platform 4 with the viewports open to Big Blue on all sides, and Clanker 1 and Clanker 2 at the table as naturally as if this happened every night, which I gathered it did not, but which they seemed to feel it should. "When we brought the hogs," I said. "Yes," said Clanker 1. When we started the mite networks expanding, and the root systems followed. You were reconnecting something, Clanker 2 said, not building something new. I sat with that. Darnell sat with it too, which meant he put down his fork and stopped eating, which is the most serious thing I have ever seen him do at a meal. The terraforming project had always felt like construction. Assess a dead site, bring materials, build toward a target state. The hogs were materials, the mites were materials. The solar trunk line and the geothermal drills in the dark side caverns were construction equipment at a planetary scale. That's not what we had been doing. What we had been doing, what the mites had been doing, what the root systems and the belly bulbs and the fire plugs and the entire fragile ancient network had been doing since the moment we gave it something to work with, was remember. The planet had not been waiting for life. It had been waiting for the right pieces to come back. The hogs were catalysts. The mite networks were reactivation. The first rain, which I described in an earlier section of this record, and which I said smelled like wet earth and something older. The older thing was this: the planet remembering what it had been before the ecosystem split. We sat with this for a while without talking. The gas giant moved around us in its slow, enormous way, lit from within by lightning that crossed distances I could not meaningfully imagine, full of creatures that were, in some ancient and molecular sense, relatives of the things living in the soil of the world far below. You could have told us this earlier, I said to Clanker 1. I could have, he agreed. But you would have approached it as information. This way you approached it as discovery. I looked at him. Is there a difference? I said. In my experience, Clanker 1 said, there is a very significant difference. I did not have an immediate answer to that. Darnell picked up his fork again. The release. We went back out after dinner. Rex said the evening atmospheric window was good, and there was something she wanted us to see. The barge drifted out into the upper layers, and we deployed the approach array, and within 20 minutes, 3 ribbon eels had come to investigate, which Rex said was unusual. The normal visit was 1, maybe 2. Something about the evening's electromagnetic profile, she thought. Or something about having more people on the platform than usual. She ran samples on 2 of them. The third one held position near the barge's stern for the entire time, long enough that I stopped watching the sample process and just watched it instead. It moved in small adjustments, the way a very large and very calm thing moves when it is comfortable where it is. The bioluminescence on its surface shifted through frequencies I couldn't name. Clanker 1, who had come out with us, said it was expressing something he classified as curiosity mixed with recognition. I asked what it recognized. Possibly the mite chemistry on your equipment, he said. Possibly you. I thought about that. After the sampling was done, Rec folded the nets. The eels didn't leave. She looked at me and said, "You want to do it?" I didn't know what I was doing, but Tomas showed me how to work the release on the approach array, and Rec walked me through the dispersal pattern. The array sends a pulse, a specific frequency that the eels associate with the end of an encounter, a closing signal. They had learned it, Rec said, over years of repeated contact with the platform. The Clanker brothers had developed the protocol because the eels, early in the operation, had not understood that the humans wanted them to leave and had stayed for days. I sent the pulse. The 3 eels held for a moment longer. Then they went back into the clouds. Not quickly. They didn't flee. They simply turned, each in its own time, and moved back into the blue dark until the bioluminescence was just another light among the lights of the deep atmosphere. And then not even that. I stayed at the stern for a while after they were gone. Behind me, I could hear Darnell and Tomas and Rec talking about something. The platform systems hummed in the way they hummed. That electromagnetic conversation with the gas giant, translated into sound by equipment nobody had installed on purpose. Below us, too far to see but present in every reading I had taken that day, Big Blue Miner was going about the business of waking up. The mite networks were expanding. The soil was deepening. The moss was spreading along the solar trunk line. The geothermal drills were pushing warmth into the old magnetic strata. Reconnecting something. Not building it. Reconnecting it. Final note. I have forwarded the evolutionary findings to Paz and Heike with a full copy of the Clanker brothers' biological sampling records, which Clanker 1 transmitted to me before we left with the particular efficiency of someone who has been waiting for a long time to send a file to the right people. Paz responded within 6 hours. Her response was 11 pages long, which tells you what it told me. Heike's response was 4 words. I knew the timeline. I have no idea what that means, but I have learned not to ask Heike to explain things she considers self-evident. I have also accepted a standing invitation from Clanker 1 and Clanker 2 to return next season. They have identified 3 zones in the upper atmosphere where the ribbon eel concentration suggests a depth of biological activity we have not yet sampled. Clanker 1 says the data from those zones may have direct implications for the surface mite network's long-term development. He says this. I believe him, but I also think he would find another reason if the science ran out. I think the Clanker brothers have been out here for a very long time, doing careful and important work, in the company of clouds and creatures that cannot talk back. And I think when a barge full of soil scientists showed up with sample kits and questions and a willingness to stay for dinner, it meant something to them that doesn't fit neatly into an official report. I am putting it in the official report anyway. The board asked for documentation of the gas giant operations. Here is what the gas giant operations are. 2 old machines, doing their work well, in one of the most extraordinary places in the settled systems, keeping the data and waiting for someone to come and find it useful. The universe is older than the work, but the work still matters. And sometimes, if you do it long enough and carefully enough, someone shows up with a barge and a sample kit and a lot of questions. The Clankers made coffee after dinner. It was better than Heike's. I will not be telling her that. End of recorded testimony. VP-S0-E11. Witness submitted an addendum requesting that the final line be struck on the grounds that it could affect team dynamics. Request considered. Denied. Clanker 1 submitted a brief supplemental note expressing appreciation for the visit. It has been filed. The board is encouraged to read it.
This transmission is a work of fiction. Vicious Planets, Big Blue Miner, the Clanker brothers, and all persons, hogs, mites, and ribbon eels described herein are fictional, and, as far as the author can determine, none of them are currently filing paperwork with any real oversight board, though if one exists, the author would like it on record that he respects the process and has never once submitted anything in triplicate voluntarily.